Okay, when you are ready for the clay step, first you want to make sure you have all of your materials ready. So you need to have your armature, make sure that it's really sturdy and secure and it's in the right pose that you want to sculpt it in. You need a cup of water, not a lot of water, just a little bit of water. You want to get some sculpting tools, so like a toothpick and a popsicle stick works really good. I've cut the tips so it's a little pointier here, so that helps. And then of course you need your clay. I'm working with paper clay. I have a recipe posted that you can use that's pretty simple. All it is it's just shredded paper that's been blended and then cornstarch and glue. It's a really light clay, and it is air dry clay, so you do want to keep it in the bag when you're not using it and only work with very small amounts at a time. So about the size of your thumb, that's about how much clay you want to work at with a time, okay? Keep the rest of it in your bag and only get more clay whenever you're done using up the clay that you have. All right, so this clay is a very soft clay, but because it is a homemade clay, you want to make sure that you are working with it pretty well. The first step that you want to do is you want to hydrate it. So even if it feels kind of soft and it's wet, you want to take your cup, you're going to get a small piece at a time, and then the first goal of the clay is that you want to do what's called the shell step. The shell step is where you're just getting a thin layer of clay covering the whole body. So I have an example here. This is a really big sculpture, so you can't see like all of it at once. But here's an example of the shell step. It's just a very thin layer of clay that you just pet on the whole thing. It's kind of like if you can imagine that you're spreading butter on toast. You're just covering all of the tin foil and tape. And then you can see I'm not quite done with this one yet because I'm still changing up my design. But you want to cover all the tin foil, tape, and wire, but just a very thin layer of clay. Now, if you're working on this over multiple days, it's really helpful if you try to do the shell layer on one day, let it dry, and then do the details on the second day. So in order to do the shell step, you're just going to take a very small piece of clay about the size of your thumbnail, and then you're just going to dip it in the water. And then after you dip in the water, you're just going to squish it a little bit to make it to where it can get sticky. And then once it's sticky, you're just going to start covering the tin foil areas. Save the wire areas for last. So I'm just going to push like this onto the sculpture. And I'm just going to keep doing that, get a little piece of clay, dunk it in the water so it hydrates, and I'm just going to squish it in my fingers a little bit. I'm just going to press it onto the clay. You want to kind of overlap it slightly, and then you're literally just going to squish it onto itself. And then if you get too thick of a layer of clay, you can also just kind of pet it and blend it down. It's okay if you see a little bit of tin foil and tape through at the first step. That's totally normal. You can just go back and add more clay, or you can just push the clay in order to fill in those gaps and grooves, okay? So your first goal is just to cover the whole thing. So I'm gonna go ahead and speed through that so you guys can kind of see that process, and then I'm gonna show you how to do the wire parts last, okay? All right, so here I go. All right, so here you can see that I've got it mostly kind of covered on the top part. You want to make sure that you're being very, very gentle with it. You want to do what's called the crab pinch. It's where you take 3 fingers like this. So I'm using my pointer, middle, and thumb. I'm just going to be pinching in this motion. You might have to practice that a little bit in order to get used to that motion. But all I'm doing is I'm just kind of like rotating my sculpture while gently, very gently pinching, and that's going to help smooth out your clay so that it's not so rough and bumpy. Make sure that your fingers are wet when doing this, so if you need to, you can dip your fingers and then rub them in the water, and then go back to very gently squeezing, not very hard, just very gently squeezing so that you can help smooth out that clay. Be very patient, take your time, don't rush through this step, otherwise you might run into some problems later. So be patient and just take your time on it. Alright, so here you can see I've let my sculpture dry for a little bit, so it's a lot easier to handle. So this has been drying for a couple hours. It usually only takes a few hours, maybe a day at most, in order to dry. This isn't completely dry. I actually wanted to change the pose up a little bit, so I actually kind of made it a little bit more playful. And so I separated the body by pulling it apart a little bit, so I'm going to make the stomach a little bit thicker. And then I also kind of repositioned the tail and twisted the head a little bit more, just to make it more dynamic. So as I said before, anytime you want to change your mind, sculpture is very forgiving. If you want to change it, just break it and reform it. You can always just add clay in the parts that you broke and just remake it. So never feel like you have to stick with one idea. So here I think this pose looks a lot cuter and it's a lot more dynamic, so that's what I'm going to go with. So once you have your shell step done, you're ready to start adding details. So that's such as in this sculpture right here, you can see that I've added little individual furs and stuff, and I've also used a toothpick to kind of carve in some fur texture, as well as a toothpick to carve in just like a little simple line for the eye. And I did like a little mouth line, I did a little nose and the ears and stuff. So those are little details that it's up to you how detailed you want your sculpture to be. So you can make it super detailed or you can keep it kind of simple. I do have, oops, sorry buddy, he kind of doesn't stand very well all the time. Here's an example of one that's already been painted. This one you can see that there's a lot of like fur details. I personally like to do like fur details on the edges and then switch to a toothpick and leave other parts smooth. It's kind of up to you how you want to add your textures and things. If you have something with scales, you can do every individual scale or you can do a massive scales. It's kind of up to you what textures you want to do for your final part. You can, this for example, for the eyes, I just kind of pushed up eyebrows and then I left the eyes smooth and I just painted on eyes. You can do like mouths and things, so it's up to you how much detail you want to put into it. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and start adding some detail to this sculpture, and yeah, there we go. Alright, so this is my sculpture once I am finished with the clay. I decided to keep it kind of a little bit smoother rather than adding a bunch of texture, just to save on a little bit of time and also because I wanted to try a new technique. So I have like I added paws on the end of the feet, has some ears. I smoothed out the face so that I can just paint on the eyes, but I did add a little bump for the nose, and I added some fluffs on the side of the cheeks in order to add like a little bit more of a dimension to the face. And then I added a little bit of fluff texture to the tail as well. So once you have the clay part done, then you're ready to paint it. When you're done painting it, you'll have a cute little sculpture. So here's my little fox guy. I think he turned out kind of cute. So good luck sculpting, and if you need any help, feel free to ask me questions and I'd be more than happy to help you. All right, good luck.